14. Defense Nucleus, killing elites spawn Shungite that fight for you. This is limited to 4 at a time. This was one of the worst items in the game and a strong contender for worst item introduced in the DLC. Now, there's a lot of mediocre boss items, but this tops the list for most disappointing. The Shungite deal hardly any damage, and their accuracy leaves a little to be desired. They're not completely useless, they do distract enemies a little bit when they actually land their shots. If the cap was higher, I'd like them a little more, but as it is now, they're super unreliable. But what really makes me dislike this item is the fact that it's the boss item for the Z construct, the hardest boss in the game, excluding Mithrix and Voidling, of course. This guy can be a total pain in the tuchus to kill, so getting this item as a quote-unquote reward just feels like a slap in the face. If this item drops, make sure you look for a recycler before picking it up, otherwise this item will just act as a paperweight in your inventory. Number 13, Titanic Knurl. Increase health by 40 and increase health regen by 1.6 HP a second. This item is essentially 1.5 Bison Steak plus a Cautious Slug as a yellow item. The boost to HP is hardly anything, it's 40 HP and that's it. It doesn't scale, it doesn't increase as you level up, it's 40 more HP, no more, no less. Even in the early game when that health boost is at its very best, it's hardly noticeable. The power of this item comes from the increased health regen, but unlike the health boost, the regen will actually increase as you level up. Not by very much, it's only 0.32 HP every level, but at least it's something. On its own, it won't do very much for you, but since it's an increase to your base stats, that means it will affect every other item in your inventory. So it's a slight boost to the efficacy of healing as a whole. Still not the best because of the different item categories, healing is the one you can get away with skimping on. When this item drops from teleporters, I will usually prefer the green item instead, but I can't hate it too much because it's dropped by the easiest boss in the game and is usually found early on. Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. My nephew got a mosquito bite on his arm, and he kept scratching it because he said, quote, it would make him look friggin' ripped. But now he's having his arm amputated, so if you want to help me and my family, please subscribe. It really will help, I promise you. My nephew is counting on you. At number 12, Pearl, increase health by 10%, not to be confused with Irradiant Pearl, an item that increases all stats by 10%. This is the common variant of that and only increases health. This item is interchangeable with Knurl, but I put this one higher because it scales better. 10% increased health is leagues better than the flat 40 from Knurl, but this item still isn't exactly balls to the walls sicko mode either. Pearl is unique because it's one of 2 items on the list that isn't technically a boss item. This item can be obtained by trading in a random lunar at a cleansing pool, with an 80% chance to get a Pearl and a 20% chance to get an Irradiant Pearl. Pearls can be scrapped, but they cannot be re-rolled with a recycler, which is a shame. If you were able to do that, you could have very powerful items with minimal effort, but that would be really busted, so it makes sense why you can't. You can actually get around this by using this item in yellow printers and then re-rolling them, but with the rarity of yellow printers, that's not a situation you'll run into very often. Even though this item isn't the best, it's hard to hate. It being bad really just makes it more exciting to get an Irradiant Pearl, so whatever. At number 11, Planula. Every time you get hit, you heal 15 HP. It may come as a surprise that I put this item as high as I did, considering it was on my worst items list, but since then I've revised my opinion on this item. I was a bit too hard on it last time. Don't get me wrong, it's still not good. 15 healing every hit is really pitiful considering it's a late game item. In essence, it has the same value as 3 repulsion armor, and actually in most situations 3 repulsion is actually preferable. However, Planula has its uses. Combining it with a few repulsion and a Hellfire Tincture, you can actually out-heal the self-inflicted damage, keeping you at full health constantly. It's also pretty nice to have on Rex loadouts where you deal self-damage. Obviously, it still has a lot of problems, the main one being scaling. As the game goes on, you'll have a larger health bar, and the enemies will be dealing more and more damage, so it being a flat increase will only get you so far. Now, I wouldn't mind this too much if it was an early game item, but it's not. With the exception of printers and recyclers, this item can only be obtained on Sky Meadow. If you plan on fighting Mithrix, this item can be a huge pain in the ass to deal with on Phase 4, especially if you're playing as somebody that lacks a lot of burst damage. Speedruns usually won't even pick this item up for that very reason. So while I do like it a little better now, overall it's still a really bad item. At number 10, Halcoin Seed. Summon Aurelianite during teleporters. This item isn't the worst, but obtaining it is often more trouble than it's worth. To get this item, you have to go to the Gilded Coast. You can get there in multiple ways. The first is through a gold portal at the end of a stage, which can be spawned with the gold shrine, or you can get there by dreaming for it in the bazaar. The latter is preferable because gold portals cost 8 times the amount as a normal chest. Once in the Gilded Coast, you have to farm monsters until you have enough money to buy all the shrines, at which point a giant gold stone titan will spawn, and if you don't kill him fast enough, he will become invincible and you'll have to rebuy every single shrine again. When you do kill him, he drops the Halcoin Seed. This whole process can take upwards of 20 minutes, and the only other reward you get is a measly 4 regular chests in Gilded Coast. This item is okay, it's nothing to write home about, but Ari does help you quite a bit during teleporters, and he scales based off of the enemy's level, which is really nice. He's a good bullet sponge / damage boost. You can't expect him to wipe out a teleporter boss, he's not that strong, but he will help you, especially in Phase 4 Mithrix. You also get some unique Mithrix quotes when that happens, which was a nice touch. Overall, not a bad item, but the process of obtaining it is a huge time sink. You can't even get this item from printers or recyclers, you have to go to the Gilded Coast. Some people like it, but it's not for me. Number 9, Genesis Loop. This is the Wandering Vagrant boss item. It's not a penis, okay? Shut up. This item creates a massive explosion when you drop below 25% of your maximum health. The explosion itself is really good. It's 6,000% base damage and has a 1.0 proc coefficient, but the fact that you have to be below 25% health in order to use it just sucks. It's an item that rewards you for playing poorly. If you're playing well and you really want to use this item, you have to intentionally put yourself in peril. It also has anti-synergy with elixirs and delicate watches. 25% health is the threshold at which both of these items are consumed. The explosion will still go off if you use an elixir, but only once since it will heal you. To use this item most effectively, you want to stay below 25% HP so it can go off multiple times. The game says it has a 30-second cooldown, but I believe that's actually wrong and it's only 15 seconds, which means you can get a lot of value out of this item if you know what you're doing. This item is also negatively affected by Eclipsate. Taking permadamage will obviously reduce your max health, so that 25% health threshold becomes even harder to achieve. This item is awesome on Engineer because the turrets will inherit it. Make sure you have a few elixirs though. This is one of, if not the best yellow item you can get on that character. It's also pretty decent on self-damage Rex, since you'll be playing at half HP 90% of the game. On everybody else, it can be really effective, but it's a really tricky item to use properly. And number 8, Queen's Gland. Too soon. Far too soon. This item summons a friendly Beetleguard that fights for you. It has the same amount of health as a normal Beetleguard, but has triple the damage. Beetleguard is awesome. Like Aurelianite, it also scales based off of the enemy's level and not your own, meaning it's always going to be somewhat effective. You'll notice Beetleguard is a little bit different from the other items that are similar to it. Empathy Cores and Zoya will spawn monsters in on a timer, meaning if they die, you'll have to wait 30 seconds or 1 minute in Zoya's case for another one to spawn. But when BG dies, a new one will spawn in instantly. Like Dionysus being birthed from the thigh of Zeus, BG is here to stay and here to slay. Well, not really, he's more of a bullet sponge, but he's a very effective bullet sponge, since he's always active. This is actually due to a bug. He's also supposed to spawn in on a 30-second cooldown, but the game starts that timer at 1 second instead of 30, so pretty big oversight on that one, but it makes it a super underrated item. And number 7, Mired Urn. If you like fucking and sucking, this item is for you. This is the Clay Dunestrider boss item. It siphons health from nearby enemies. There's a lot to like about this item. For one, there's a direct correlation between damage siphoned and health gained. So items like Focus Crystal, watches, etc. will increase your health regen, in addition to your damage. It also applies the Tartar debuff, which slows enemies by 50% and contributes to Deathmark. This item is great on everybody, but melee survivors like Merc, Loader, and Acrid excel most with it. This is really the only healing item you'll need for a while. In the late game, it becomes harder to use because you have to start attacking enemies from range. But yeah, there's really not much else to say. Very solid item. At number 6, Empathy Cores. Cores with empathy, I guess. I swear this sounds like something you'd find on Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop.com. It'll fit right in with my Stone Diffuser or my Altitude Oil. The description for that one is literally just when things are high up in the air. Yes, of course, you won't catch me hiking without my altitude oil. I never leave the house without it. But unlike the items on Goop.com, Empathy Cores will actually work. This item is very similar to Queen's Gland, but instead of a Beetleguard, it's 2 Solus probes. The probes will also scale based off of the enemy's health, but they do additional damage for each ally on your team, which is massive. If you happen to have spare drone parts, this is hands down the best item you can find. It's the most overpowered synergy in the entire game by far. But without drone parts, they're just okay. They act as good distractions, and unlike BG, can attack flying enemies, but they tend to wander off and attack things you don't really need them to. They're not the most consistent allies, but damn do they have a lot of potential. Just be careful in Mithrix Phase 4 because they will kill you in seconds. Seriously, keep your distance. Coming in at number 5, Little Disciple, or as I like to call it, Lil D. This is the Grove Tender boss item. It fires tracking wisps while sprinting. It's got a 1.0 proc coefficient and 40 meters of range. This item is fantastic. Sprinting is an action you'll be doing 90% of the time, so obviously this item will be active 90% of the time. One stack deals 300% damage, which is just enough to not proc bans, which is actually a really good thing because it means you won't waste them on weaker hits. It can, however, still proc bans off of ATGs, which I think strikes a nice balance. Stacking movement speed increases its fire rate, so it can still do more damage without wasting your ban procs. It's perfect. And stacking movement speed is something you should be doing anyway. The 1.0 proc coefficient is huge for starting proc chains, and it makes it scale that much better. This item is just free damage that you really don't have to think about. It's an awesome item and definitely deserves to be in the top 5. At number 4, a Radiant Pearl, increase all stats by 10%. This includes health, health regeneration, movement speed, damage, attack speed, crit chance, and armor. Crit, attack speed, and damage are all separate stats, so this is like a 25% damage boost. This item has a 20% chance to be obtained from cleansing pools in exchange for lunar items. 20% might not sound like a lot, but this is actually post-buff. It used to only be a 4% chance, and when combined with the scarcity of cleansing pools, this was a very hard item to obtain, and still is for the most part. Ironically, the map with the highest chance to spawn cleansing pools, Aphelion Sanctuary, has a bug where lunar pods are unable to spawn, which is really sad. Hopoo never bothered to fix it, so hopefully Gearbox will eventually. Overall, this is a really hard item to obtain, even now. And while it is really good, the effects are things you can kind of get from white items. Yes, it does multiply the value of those items, but a Radiant Pearl is mostly a novelty item. Like the ordinary Pearl, you can't re-roll it or find it in printers. If you want this item, you have to find it in cleansing pools. Regardless, this item is incredibly powerful and will make an excellent addition to any build. At number 3, Shatter Spleen. This is the Imp Overlord boss item, and with it, you have a 5% crit chance. Crits will bleed enemies for 240% base damage. Bleeding enemies will explode on death for 400% damage, plus a bonus 15% of the monster's maximum health. My word, I feel like I'm reading the Unabomber's Manifesto. It's so fucking long. This item has 2 main effects. 1, crits will now bleed, and bleeding enemies will create an explosion when they die. Bleed as a whole is one of the strongest builds in the game, and the fact that you can now get that from crit, something you should be stacking anyway, means this item absolutely shreds. But the kicker is that's not even the best part of this item. The explosion is actually the more useful effect. This is the only area of effect item in the entire game that scales off the enemy's health bar. If an enemy has 1 million health, Spleen will create an explosion for 150,000 multiplied by the rest of the damage in your inventory. But it does have some drawbacks, the main one being it's very survivor dependent. Finding this item on Commando is a lot different than finding it on Loader. High fire rate proc characters will get a lot of use out of it, burst characters, not so much. They can still utilize the explosion, not as effectively, but they can. The bleed portion becomes kind of irrelevant without a crowdfunder. I would have put this item higher, but I just couldn't justify it because the next 2 items on this list work well on pretty much everybody. Coming in at the number 2 spot, Molten Perforator. This is the Magma Worm boss item, and with it you have a 10% chance to call forth 3 magma balls dealing 300% damage each. Each magma ball ignites enemies and has a 0.7 proc coefficient. This item is cream-worthy. It has amazing damage and area of effect potential. It's also a staple item for creating massive screen wipe proc chains. This item is great on every single character. Burst survivors don't proc it as often, but when they do, it'll deal giga damage. Small tip, when using this item, it's really helpful to have a Chrono Bauble. Without it, it's a lot easier for the enemies to dodge the magma balls. This item got even better post-DLC with the introduction of ignition tanks, which of course lets burns deal additional damage. I'll circle jerk back around to this item in just a second, but first, number 1, Charge Perforator. This is the Overloading Worm boss item, and it gives you a 10% chance to strike lightning, dealing 500% damage. The Strike has a 1.0 proc coefficient and is thus great for proc chains. This item just feels like a pack-a-punched ATG or a mini capacitor. Obviously, this item is very similar to Molten Perforator as well, but where Molten Perforator is more suited to area of effect damage, Charged Perforator is more on the single target side. If you're dealing with a large horde of enemies, or large enemies like grandparents, magma balls flying everywhere will usually find a target. But when you're dealing with just one enemy, for example Mithrix, Molten Perforator has a hard time landing its shots. Charged Perforator is a lot better in these situations. Enemies can still move out of it if they move fast enough, but that's primarily an Eclipse thing, and having a Chrono Bobble will mitigate that for the most part. Charged does have a few interesting little quirks. It rolls crit chance differently from every other item in the game. Normally, items will crit if the attack that procced it was a crit, but Charged Perforator rolls crit independently of the attack that procced it. This normally isn't a huge deal, but as a consequence, it means Railgunner cannot crit with this item. I don't know why they made it this way, I wish it just worked the way every other proc item did, but whatever. With that small gripe aside, this is the best yellow item in the entire game. In some situations, items like Empathy Cores or Shatter Spleen might be better, but in most runs, Churf gets my vote. But that's it, let me know if you want to see more ranking videos in the comments below. By the way, when YouTubers say that kind of shit, they're really just manipulating you into commenting, so it helps the video in the algorithm. So yeah, make sure to do that. No, but for real, thank you guys for all the support. It's been a crazy year, and I seriously appreciate every one of you guys. As always, an extra special thank you to the channel members for helping support the channel. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Ta-ta for now.